go. So welcome. All right.
Fiona, we have we have a closed captioning request, so you're gonna have to make sure you talk slower than normal.
Fabulous. Thank you. I'm also going to ask everyone if I get talking quickly, because I can. You can do this with your hand, and I will take that as a slow down. I get it naturally from my father. He talks so quickly you can't understand his punchline to his jokes because it's also coupled with laughing. So I am very happy to have and see your hand do this, and I am happy to slow my cadence of the way that I speak down. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. So, troubleshooting with bandwidth, make sure that you have all of your other background screens closed if you can. If you need any additional supports, like having a live transcript or closed captioning, we're happy to have that. We're going to start with introducing yourself, and also any pronouns that you use, and we are recording. Okay, let's get started. Thank you everyone for taking the time to be here today. I'm so thrilled to be here in an international conference, being able to present with people from literally all over the world. So thank you so much for taking this time to be here with me. This conference literally couldn't happen without all of the different ABCD practitioners. And as you can see, it is a stellar lineup of so many different people contributing and volunteering to make this happen. So a huge, huge, huge thank you to the conference hosts and the time and energy and volunteer work that gets put into being able to host a conference of this size. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Where I am hosting this call from. So I just want to give enormous thanks to the Anishinaabe peoples past, present, and future for their love of the land and their peoples and their enduring resilience. This is also known as Singhampton, Ontario, Canada. I also want to anchor us into the fact that we do not live in a just and equitable society. You know, lives and lands continue to be stolen, treaties aren't honored. Thank you, Dana. And our society continues to profit from underpaid workers' contributions, and the systems of colonization maintain a racist caste-based society. And there are so many opportunities to disrupt and interrupt and co-create a future that we so desire. And my hope is that in sharing this leadership lens, that we have an opportunity to actually practice and think about the ways that we show up in the world and how we participate. So I just want to give a huge shout out to the two people in the room that are providing me support. We have our storytelling harvester, Eva. Would you be willing to give a quick wave, Eva? Thank you. And just a really quick note around Eva and her work. And so Eva asked the question, how do you share your life in an honest, justice-informed, and engaging way? That's the question Eva Fernandez is trying to solve. She's a pro-justice storytelling coach from the Global South. She helps entrepreneurs, artists, thinkers, healers, and activists share the wisdom of their life experience without sounding cheesy, clueless, or contrived. And she works especially with BIPOC and people from the Global South who are trying to contextualize their life story within the framework of social justice and feminism. It's deep work, and clients are usually trying to work on a book, series of essays, or audio art with her. As a former editor, journalist, and corporate marketing executive, she uses a combination of deep listening, coaching, gentle nudging, editorial guidance, and strategic thinking to get her clients closer to articulating their genius. So thank you, Eva, so much for being our harvester here today. Dana, can you give a quick wave? Thank you. Dana is the founder of Social Impact Projects. She facilitates group projects that are pleasurable and not a pain in the ass. bringing people together for projects that matter, support for teams and organizations who want to have a good time while interrupting project management, to organizing their projects, centering joyful, purposeful relationships. So thank you, Dana, for being here with the tech support. She'll be monitoring the chat. And if you have any questions, I won't be able to watch it all. Dana will interrupt and just bring your questions into this. This is meant to be a fully participatory time. And if you are willing to stay on with us after, Dana's presentation follows mine directly after this. Okay, so as always, audio, if you can stay muted until we're ready to speak, that'd be fabulous. Thank you. If you're having trouble with bandwidth, you're welcome to turn your camera off. Dana's our support for tech, and it is being recorded. All right, let's jump in. I even changed the naming because I thought, how presumptuous to say the leadership lens, as if it's the leadership lens. It's a leadership lens. So I'm just sharing my ahas around, this is about gaining perspective. There's no right or wrong. There's no perfect way of doing things. We're just gonna walk in and practice this. So I'm going to invite you, as we come together, to potentially turn off your self view. I'm going to do that right now. And the purpose for this is, we were never meant to hold mirrors walk around with us, especially when we're presenting and participating. So if you want to, you're welcome to hover over the picture of you, and there'll be 3 dots, and you can scroll down and it will say hide self view. And now I don't need to watch myself while I'm presenting. And that makes my nervous system feel good. So thank you. In this time we have together, please prioritize your comfort. Get up and move around, eat, do whatever you need to do to make you feel most comfortable and able to be present here together. And I'd like to just walk us through a really brief orienting exercise where I'd like you to think about where you are in your room, feel your sit bones in your chair. Or wherever you're sitting, might be a couch, you might be on the floor, you might be standing, and think about how you're connected, and take a brief moment first to orient yourself within your room. So that might look like doing a quick scan, and see if you can turn all the way around and twist from your center so that you're actually twisting your entire body and looking behind you. And then as you turn around all the way to the other side, as you're scanning your environment, I'd encourage you to check out where your exit areas are. It helps us feel safe, where we know where we are in a room and also how we can get out of the room. And lastly, I'd love to just briefly orient to all of the faces that we have in our space. So welcome. Thank you for being here, and thank you for taking this time to be here with us all today. How's my speed? Okay, good. I like to go backwards instead of forwards. So that you understand how we're going to work through today, we're going to toggle in and out, have a basic understanding of what that looks like. We're going to do a co-creative case study, and we're going to apply it to practice. And so the goal of today's participation is that you have additional perspective so that you can make decisions with more information. This isn't about finding the right information or the wrong information, or even making a decision. It's solely to gain perspective around the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So this is me when I was little. I had an experience in the hospital, and I've loved humans literally ever since I was a little person. I went into nursing and found out about prevention, and my heart was sold. How can we keep people out of hospitals? Yes, please. How can we keep people healthy? Yes, please. So I've nursed my entire career in fringe roles that tend to be focused on prevention and how do we support people prior to them getting ill, or if they are in that continuum, how do we maintain and sustain their health? So I realized a good portion of our lives are spent within work. And if dis-ease can lead to disease, then what would it look like if we were seen, heard, and understood in our workplaces? What would it look like if we were encouraged to apply our assets to their full potential in our workplace? And how might we in the circles that we travel in flourish? So those are the questions that I ask myself regularly. And so I created a really simple methodology around how we can navigate the circumstances that we find ourselves within our organizations. The process for me is getting curious, then getting creative, and celebrating along the way. And it's meant to be in a circle because you can do any of these at any point in time. The part that we're going to focus in on today is solely the curious section. So just I'm anchoring you within a methodology that I've created in the fact that we are looking at the curious section for the purpose of today's session. So I don't know about you, but I have found that I have come into places and spaces where I literally am in the trees and I cannot see my way forward. I am not able to gain the perspective that I need with enough information. And so what we're going to be doing today is practicing soaring above, looking over top, and looking from a forest view. So you can pretend, you can even think of your favorite bird. I love the crows and ravens. So what does that look like? What does that, 1,000-foot view look like? And what are the perspectives that we can gain by being able to toggle from this is our reality here on the ground, all the way up to this is what's happening in the multiple systems that we are operating in our everyday life. I am going to be anchoring us to this model. It's a slight variation on Urie Bronfenbrenner's Socio-Ecological Model. I have taken the liberty of changing a few of the words to fit the concepts that I would like to discuss today. And I'd also like you to think about it as we move into it. I love the analogy of being in a river. I don't know whether anybody else is familiar with, rivers and the way that they move or the water. You can have a lot of surface currents that you can see, and you can even rate them, right? So you can be in rapids up to class 5, and they can be big water, and you can see what's happening and coming at you. So much of our world is actually the undercurrent. And those undercurrents are so deep, and some of them are as big as riptides that we don't see. And so this exercise, again, is to move past what we can see on the surface and get us underneath to understand the lower components that are often unseen, unheard, unspoken, and not surfaced in a way that we can have discussions about them. Oh, it does like to go back, doesn't it? There we go. All right. So this is literally a co-creative case study. So I'm going to be bringing forward an actual experience of myself, and I'm going to invite you to think about an experience you're having. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of where, anchoring in, I will tell a little bit of my story, and then we're going to pause, and I'm going to ask you to think about your story. And the reason we're doing this literally co-creative is so that you can see the pattern and the flow of the questions that we ask ourselves in the circumstances we find ourselves in. So I'm anchoring into a story that had conflict. It was within an organization, and there was an ethical issue that needed to be addressed. So that is the general arc of the case study that I will bring forward. You are welcome to use any type of case study within an organization or within the, it could be a volunteering position. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions specifically about what you might want to think of for your case study, or are you ready to jump into this? If we're ready to jump in, a thumbs up. We're good? We're good? Okay, brilliant. Thanks. So starting off, where did it take place? I found myself at a university in a leadership role for the liaison between community and students. So let's take a quick moment, think about where you are within the circumstance that you're thinking about, and who's the organization, and let's literally walk through these layers together. So who is involved? I got into a placement with nursing students in a community agency. We, both the students and I, quickly realized that this placement was not only going to give us the time, they were not going to give us the time to complete the required course expectations, let alone provide nursing interventions. We are being told by staff of the community organization that there were concerns with management and lack of ethical care provided to the patrons. So right there, we've got a big smorgasbord of problems where the students aren't able to complete their coursework. They're being asked to do things that aren't part of our nursing curriculum, coupled with an organization is having struggles within their own internal structures. And as nursing students, we were needing to navigate both the organization coupled with the requirements from the university to meet the completion of the course. We took a look at our nursing code of ethics and found that we were required to address the situation as we weren't able to provide safe, compassionate, ethical care, let alone actually provide nursing interventions. So let's pause here again for a moment. We know who was involved. We're starting to get an idea of what was happening. Briefly, just think about what might your ethics be in circumstances. And if it's not guided by a specific ethical framework, what are the values that you hold? How do those values inform the decisions that you are going to be making? So as a group, we decided that we would take it to the nursing director. The students and I traveled from our location in the placement in the community to the university. And when we arrived, the director refused to speak with the students and would only speak with me. So let's again pause to think about your situation. When you are in circumstances like these, what are the channels to solve the problem that you're in? Are there channels within your organizations to solve these problems? Do people trust those channels? And do those channels listen? So these are things that I'm asking from a general sense of how do we walk in and how do we communicate and how do we participate in a way that allows us to surface the different currents that are happening in a way that actual communication can happen. And the resolution, briefly to close my circumstance in the story that I'm telling, was that the director was irate that we brought this issue to her because we should have been grateful that we even had a placement to bring students to, and that we would have to make do with what we had, and that it was not her problem, it was ours, and how dare I have brought this forward, and in particular with the students there as well. Fast forward, just to fully close the loop, they no longer had that as a placement after that semester. So we had some outcomes that were heard, coupled with some very interesting experiences. This is where we're actually going to dive deep. And I know there's lots of words. We're going to take it step by using the example that I just spoke about. We're going to break it down into the individual, and I've chosen these layers specifically because they're the ones that pertain to this story. Had the earth played more of a role or community played more of a role, I would have included those components as well. But for the purpose of today, we are going to focus in on the individual, relationship, organization, and society. So, and what I'm going to do is we're going to go through the individual. I'm going to share my pieces. And then if people want to jump in with some of their experiences or the things that they're processing, please feel free to do so. So I'll pause when I get through my individual component. So in this circumstances, the identities that I hold, I am a white, cisgender female of a dominant caste. I hold a position where, in theory, from a hierarchical perspective, I hold power over the students because I am their coordinator and I am also under a director. I am also in relation with my community organizations. So that means that I have to foster and support relationship at community where we are equals, and I'm somewhat under that because they were requiring us to do work that wasn't part of our mandate. So there are multiple layers happening there. The privileges that I held within this circumstance were, and this is, the students actually pointed this out, when we decided from an ethical perspective, this needed to be addressed with the director, their comment was, but Fiona, you might lose your job, which is a legitimate reality as a contract position worker, first time being a contract position with this organization, not necessarily having comrades and people that I can work with regularly. I was external from the university. I was in a precarious position and they had a legitimate concern. The privilege I held was I had another job and that other job wanted me full time. So if I lost my job, I would have something to fall back on. And then also couched within this, I grew up in a very patriarchal household and within the family. And so when there was an absolute hard stop of we will not talk about it because it makes me feel uncomfortable, for me, that brings up a whole lot internally. So as an individual, those are all some of the currents that are happening that place and provide me some perspective around the circumstance. Would anybody like to unpack and or give a really brief, quick story arch and unpack a bit of their individual life with us? Is everybody following along okay? Is this making sense? Yeah, I'm getting some nods. I will move into the relationship then. So what identities made those you are in relationship hold? So you may not know all of their identities. I know that I was within a system where the relationship I held to the director, she was a long-standing tenured professor who had desires to become the dean. She is of the dominant caste. She had been in academia for, I think, 35 to 40 years and had an established career there. The identities of the students, there were people who were of all different backgrounds, all different experiences, all different castes within our society. We had people who were trained doctors in other fields, in other countries, to people that were just coming out of high school. So we had a very wide range with the identities of the people and the students that I was working with. And when I think about how the relationships were created, I was assigned these students, the students were assigned me. They didn't get a choice in the matter. The director hired me. She chose to work with me. When I think about the relationships and and also contextually, nursing students don't always want to do community placements. They just, it's not a sexy line. It doesn't get them using all of their skills. So contextually within those relationships, they may or may not have wanted to be there, even coupled with the requirements of their nursing education. Trust is another component, right? So how is trust established? With the students, we quickly worked in a way of checking in with each other and seeing each other for each other as humans and how we were going to present and work together, and created some social and group norms. Trust was their ability to say, we are concerned about this. I need to bring forward this ethical issue. Will I be heard? And I believe that we were able to create that trusting relationship. When I think about my relationship with the director, I didn't have that trusting relationship. I had met her all at once for a very brief interview. I had been hired and I hadn't had time to establish the work that I was doing with her or how I was doing that. And then what are the power positions? So again, director, very, very high level, has the capability of making unilateral decisions that she's obviously taking into account multiple perspectives. I was down power with her, down power also, and if you're familiar with sort of the power dynamics, people in up power may or may not have any awareness of the privileges that they are holding in their up power positions. The organization and the community that we were in we were also down power there because we were being allowed into their organization on their terms. Does anybody have any questions about the relationship component? Contextually, you could come up with any number of questions to ask yourself to gain more perspective. I am using these questions in particular to allow us to sink into how do we gain some of that perspective when we are in the thick of things to be able to zoom out. And the following I actually have, we're not going to necessarily go into those slides, but I do have slides that allow you to get really almost forensic about how does the individual component work? How does the relationship component work? And again, for this purpose, for this example, I'm giving and using these prompts. So may I move on? Is everybody okay if I keep going with organization?
Fiona?
Yes.
I have a quick question, because it's wonderful, all the nuances that you need to sort of address. And this obviously takes some time. And then for somebody like me, I'm a learner that I learn in conversation with people. So I'm just wondering, for someone like me, if I was asking myself these questions, it sounds like I would need someone else to process this with. So when you were in this situation, did you have that? Did you have somebody that you could process and have this dialogue back and forth? Or in your style of learning, is this something you were journaling? I'm just wondering on the practical components of actually processing all of this at one time.
Great question, Dana. I gained this perspective after the fact because I didn't have this framework at that point in time. I also, and we can talk about this at the end, I probably would have approached it differently. I probably would have approached this circumstance differently with the information that I had had. If I had had this information that then I would have done it differently. And so, yes, absolutely talking with somebody and asking those questions, somebody who's relatively close to the circumstance that can provide some guidance or insight and also hold other perspectives, because the more perspectives we gain from other people and outside of our own, because frankly, we are individuals and everything that we see is through our own lens. We can have empathy for others, we can understand, and gaining perspective and doing that in collaboration with people that you trust is so helpful. And so, yes, this could be absolutely a practical tool to sit down with somebody. It could be within your organization. If you're not feeling supported in your organization, that might be somebody that you trust to support you in that process of getting really curious about what's happening and almost allowing you the detachment so that you can be more of an observer and less of a reactor. So it allows you just to sort of scoop out of what are the different, what are the currents that are happening. And two, when you have an awareness of those currents and a greater sense of the perspective of what's happening, it can also be used to inform the decisions and the approach that you take to address the circumstances that you're in. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah. And I just wanted to bring up another question from the chat. It's a great one from Marcienne. Fiona, could I use this as an engagement or an exit process?
Oh.
Or potentially both.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes. I mean, what would it look like if our organizations took this into account? Coming into an organization, anchoring yourself within an organization, naming the circumstances, and absolutely from an exit, how much you could learn from an exit interview by using this. Marcienne, and I'm hoping we may get to this in the conversation. I am hoping that we get to how many different ways this could be used, because I actually think that there may be quite a number of applications to practice in which this perspective building tool can gain us. Any other questions right now? Okay. I'm always curious about organizations, right? How was the organization founded? By whom? The organization I was working in was founded in the 1960s, led by a man by Greg Platts, I believe. So we have people with their identities in the way that they believe education should happen, coupled with the way that education in Canada and in Ontario and how that is supposed to happen. So what are the foundational blocks of why these organizations were created in the very first place, right? What values and hierarchies exist, the layers, and the layer upon layer of hierarchies and decision-making is enormous, coupled with not just the teachers, it's all of the supports that are required to make sure that education can happen. So multiple hierarchies. While we valued bringing nurses into this world who were capable and competent and had the skills, what were our core values? And in the circumstance that I was talking about, were any values used? I don't know. With the information I have now, maybe part of my conversation could have been, I really value not only being able to use our Canadian nursing ethics, but to also simultaneously allow nursing students to practice what this means to practice in an ethical manner. So I value integrity. So, and I wasn't necessarily seeing values at that point. Then who has the power, right? We've already talked a bit about this. In an organization, as a contract employee, I don't have the power. It's not me. I can influence, I can suggest, and I don't make the decisions. And who gets to talk? The students didn't get to talk, right? Who's listened to? We know that placement was discontinued. So I do believe that one message did get through. And in the midst, it didn't feel like it was being listened to, right? So that's the components around some of the general questions I think about organizations. We could get so much deeper into each one of these, but let's lastly finish up on the society end of things. So what are the systemic currents at play, right? There's people who want to succeed and move up the ladder, right? So that the hierarchy is a strong component and draw. There are wanting to stick to perfectionism over accountability. There are desires to hold power over, not with, for, or to. Those are just a few that pop into my mind right now. And these systemic currents for me leave me feeling like I just need to show up and shut up, right? For me, in this system, with all of these pieces happening, what that tells me is my voice is not valued. So just show up and shut up and do your job. Don't rock the boat. We value that you're here to support the students, and it ends there. Don't think about it. Don't consider your ethics. Just do your job and show up and shut up. And for me, that leaves me feeling disenfranchised, right? So those systems have a fallout. The intent may have been, there's way too much to handle right now. I just need you to go away because I'm too busy with so many other things. The impact leaves me thinking, how can I go back to nursing students and say, our ethics aren't going to be addressed, even though we're teaching nursing and teaching nursing ethics, right? So the intent versus impact, that arc has a very different experience for the people in power versus the people that are influenced. And then what about these systems stop the conversation? And could there have been another way? So when we have an absolute, just how dare you come in and ask these questions, let alone bring students with you, how could that have been done differently? And I think there would have been and could have been ways to have done it differently. And when we stopped the conversation one spot, at that point, I wasn't deep enough within the organization to know my different areas. And I also knew at that point I would not continue within the organization. So I did not expend more energy attempting to continue to wrap around and continue this conversation, which is a privilege, right? Dependent on how serious that ethical issue was, if it was a more serious one, I would have dug in deeply. We were able to, with the students, figure out a way to complete our placement at that point in time, and meet the requirements, both of the agency we were supporting and the university. And there could have been multiple other ways. And so this is part of, again, opening up the possibilities, and especially from an asset-based perspective, what other assets could have been brought into play? Who were the other support people that could have supported us? Where in the locations were we that we could have, maybe relied more on? So I'm going to pause there. I've talked way longer than I had wanted to. Does anybody have any questions or comments, or things that are floating to the top for you? I'm seeing a few faces where it's most likely a thinking face. What are the initial floating to the top reactions to what I've shared? How is it landing in your body? Are parts of it overwhelming? Are parts of it liberating? Where does it land for you?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. I think for me, what's coming up is sort of a what happens now. And I think I jumped to that of sort of, okay, we're thinking through having conversations with people either at the same level of power or a similar one. And then how are we working to resist the organization or the society, or have those hard conversations or bring that forward? So I think it's more of a how question around, how to facilitate these conversations with bosses or supervisors in my case, or what does that look like practically? But that also might be jumping ahead. I think there's opportunity to sit in sort of the questions.
Well, let's go there. That's a great question, Hannah, because if you're thinking about that, we won't be able to keep on going without having a general completion arc, I guess. And so, yes, this is absolutely going into, this is getting creative. What does that look like, and how can we complete it? When I reflect back on that circumstance, there was a number of things. When I think about the power positions, bringing students in to somebody who has a very much a power over philosophy would have immediately triggered their nervous system and get them to shut down and protect themselves. That wasn't facilitated well by me. So having a general sense of the power dynamics, I could have also talked to, there was a middle person. I could have talked further and given more time to percolate on a process forward. There were other people who were providing community placements that I could have reached out to for guidance, who had been there for longer. What I know about myself is that, and I love this analogy, sometimes I come across as those 3 inches of rain on drought-stricken land in 5 minutes, where what would it felt like if I had shown up as a 24-hour drizzle on drought-stricken land? So also knowing who I am and how I show up, understanding the perspectives that I hold, the values that I hold, how could I have approached it in a different manner? what about the organization would allow for that conversation? I don't know that I looked at their structure closely enough to see whether they even had any policies around conflict or differences of opinion. Those are the things that float to the top. Do you have a circumstance you'd like to quickly walk us through that would help it land for you, the completion arc?
No, I mean, that's really helpful. I think I'm a similar situation. I'm just on the student end of it. So I'm one of the students trying to figure out what it means to have people in the institution that are powerful and that have been there for 40 years. So I think it's definitely resonating, and that was really helpful. And sort of what are the middle people and where are the supports and the policies and the structures in place already, and sort of what are those assets that I can draw on right now.
Absolutely. And there may be policies and procedures, there may be student groups, there may be multiple components, and it's also, I often think about the role that we hold when we do want to bring comments to power. I also think of us as sort of like the canaries in the coal mine. We're singing and we stop singing. That's never a good sign, right? So how do we surface that which we value in a way that can be heard? Because our organizations will benefit from the feedback, the difference between intent versus impact, and the ability to grow, because there's enormous growth opportunities when we address the underlying issues and don't just slap a Band-Aid solution on it, right? And I also, one thing I didn't anchor us into is this process is to be used with adaptive challenges, right? So we've got, I'm going to just stop sharing right now and for a moment so that I can see everybody, is simple problems, right? And I got this from Tamarack. Simple problems are like baking a cake. There's a recipe, you bake it, you most likely are going to get a cake. Then complicated or technical problems are ones like taking a rocket to the moon. We've seen recently that people can take rockets to the moon. There's a lot of education required, and it's a technical problem, right? It's how do I get this amount of fuel with this amount of weight up into the stratosphere? We're talking about complex ones that are like raising a child. We're talking about this no blueprint. We can't come up with something that just says, you know, if you do this, you're going to have this outcome. So, and I also use the word adaptive. We need to be able to take in this information and pivot in a way that is supportive, allows us to be the drizzle, not the downpour, be heard, so that we can move from showing up and shutting up to standing up and speaking out and being heard in that and having it productive. That's a great question, Hannah. Any other questions, comments?
Fiona, I wrote something in the chat and it's coming up for me right now. I think often in the past, I've seen that I've thought that my leadership has to come from me speaking, from me taking a stand and using my voice. And what I've learned more recently is that leadership can come in my active listening. Leadership can come in the form of me looking at the relationships that already exist within like a complex problem. Who are the people that already have really good relationships, who communicate really well with one another? Maybe they have similar styles and preferences in terms of how they communicate, which has built a level of trust. And if I don't have that, I can defer, you know, to those other people and talk to them. Like talk to that other person and say, hey, like I'm struggling or the group's struggling. I know you have a relationship with this person. Are you willing to talk with them? Or, you know, and work through, like co-create with them a solution where it's not necessarily my voice taking the stand with that person in power. And I think a lot of that has come with my unlearning of like white supremacy culture, quite frankly, this like fix it action bias that I don't need to take that. And I could potentially do a much better job of protecting and being an ally to others and how I walk alongside and support them in terms of them potentially using their voice, and how that would feel for them and how that might feel for the other person in the conflict who really needs to hear certain words and guidance. Yeah, so I don't know if that helps, but yeah, I love that the questions are something that part of the questions could be asking that, like, am I the channel, the communication channel, or am I the conduit?
That was fabulous. Thank you, Dana. Really great perspective. And I also want to name if you hold an identity that has multiple intersections, not being seen and heard and having to use somebody else and be the chant. Which one is that, Dana? If I'm not the one speaking.
You're the conduit.
Thank you. So being the conduit for somebody who has multiple intersections within their identity can feel very dysregulating, because our society seeks to marginalize those and keep those voices quiet. So also within that, and so the intersection for myself is solely just being born a cisgender female, right? So when I am in circumstances where I am having to speak with men who operate in a very traditional way, and women, because the example of the director, she has used the same ways of being, it is very dysregulating for me when I just want to be seen, heard, and understood. I have something to say and I want to be heard. And so being that conduit can feel like you are releasing or relinquishing your power. And we are working in systems. And so it's that balancing act. I just also want to hold space for, yes, we want to have our voices heard. Yes, we may not be the one that can actually deliver that. And what can we do to get to the point where we can be seen, heard, and understood?
I have a question on that. I'm thinking about a situation when I was in an organization, and there were significant ethical issues that I was trying to surface. And yes, I think the intersections of my identity prevented my objections to be heard. And I was younger, and I was like definitely more immature and frustrated with the situation. But if I take it back and I look at it through your lens, and I was able to see, okay, well, what are my personal dynamics? What was actually happening in the organization? And then on a larger cultural and societal perspective, I can see that there was such a misalignment, or I could see things that perhaps were not being acknowledged by the C-suite, where like I feel like if I tried to talk about power dynamics, where I would say, you're in an up position, like they would just shut me down completely. And so I feel like this lens is almost like, it feels more like a bomb for me, rather than something I can actually use to lobby my case when they just don't want to hear it. Is that me being too irrational, jumping too far to the end, like trying to see some kind of solution? Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Such a good question, Eva. And this is the question that I've asked myself multiple times around, also why I've exited organizations, right? My top two values are integrity and courage. And if I can't show up within integrity and courage, I can't be there any longer. And so and I have the privilege of being able to find another job. I just also want to honor the privilege of being able to live completely aligned with the values that I hold. And I think it's also being aware of the currents so that you aren't feeling over and over that you're stepping up against that brick wall, and then the brick wall is saying to you, it's you that's the problem, because it's not you. So having the context to understand and appreciate the currents you're in also allows you the conscious decision-making of how you want to be there. what do you want to do, versus feeling like you are hampered by the ability and by the way that it's downloaded on us that we are the problem for standing up and speaking out, or wanting to surface some of those underlying currents that really, in the end, actually impact our ability to deliver the services that we desire to bring into the world. You're not complaining or bringing it to the C-suite just because you want to stir the pot. This is because it's an actual ethical issue. It impacts so much more than just yourself. And it often becomes internalized. So this is also a tool. And when I say it's a liberation tool, it's meant to understand those layers so that you can give back to the system what's theirs, own your part of the, part of the puzzle, and move forward with awareness. Does that somewhat answer, or does that make sense, Eva?
Yeah, it does, but I feel like I wonder how much, like in the heart of a conflict, when something is really arising, for me, I feel like in the past I would really struggle to be aware of everything that's happening around me. That's generally perspective I get afterwards. Once I leave, or that's like I can't and it, like afterwards is in months and maybe years afterwards where I can actually begin to see those larger pictures, because that's so much of what our culture is that we don't know, or we don't see the rules that are informing it. And I wondered, how do you get that perspective when you're right in the middle of it? Because initially conflicts just feel like there's I said this and you said that. We can't go like, well, what were the founding values on which this organization was created, and what is the larger overtures to my industry?
Absolutely. And that's the part where that's actually an excellent point that I probably didn't hit on. Thank you, Eva, is we can't get curious if our nervous systems are on fire, right? And these are existential threats, because ultimately, internally, we perceive that misalignment as an enormous threat. And they're real threats. Losing a job is a real threat because you want to bring up an ethical issue. That's a real threat. And so curiosity happens when we have the capacity to have our nervous system online. So practices like, and I believe it actually came from Resmaa Menakem, that idea of orienting even into your room. The purpose of flipping your body and twisting it is actually to get your vagal nerve to recognize those exit strategies, to know that you are safe, you're oriented in the here and the now. That actually is a way to trip your nervous system back into alignment to be able to get curious. There are so many other practices, and I'm sure you can find them in many different places. That might look like meditation, that might look like connecting with somebody you love. It might be doing something to bring your body some comfort. So that might look like getting yourself a hot drink. Maybe you have the opportunity to have a warm shower, or maybe a cold shower, whatever your nervous system needs in that moment, because curiosity cannot happen when our nervous system is going threat, 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 threat.
Fiona,
Mm-hmm.
I just want, Lisa had a comment. She says that I'm cooking and it's evening here now. I'm tired, so I might have missed some elements, but I think that the proposed analysis can help to identify persons who can be potentially influential allies. Focusing on these potential allies at intermediate and higher levels can help bring about change.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you've got your nervous system online and you're able to get curious, you can absolutely use that to sort of zoom out and not have such an individual reaction, because the threat reaction that we are experiencing is real. So if we're able to literally say, it's okay, we've got our nervous system online, we're just going to zoom out and look at it from a really high level, that opportunity will absolutely allow you to see, oh, there's so many more allies I didn't even think of tapping on the shoulder. And maybe they aren't allies. Maybe part of that conversation, they say, yeah, that's a big deal, but I'm not going to stick out my neck for that. That tells you information too. All of this is good information And it also allows you to move from subconscious decision-making to that conscious decision-making from step to choose your next steps. A great comment, Lisa. Thanks, Marcian. Any other questions, comments? Does anybody want to delve a bit deeper into the how, or what would feel, or how would you feel about just quickly popping through some of the other slides that I did have to share with you around some of the questions you could ask yourself in those different circumstances, just as a really brief sort of sinking in as other possibilities? Yes? Okay, I've got a thumbs up from Kim. So thanks, Kim. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to move this over. So you'll have access to these slides when the conference is over. There's a lot of information on them. And these are the questions that I ask myself when I'm thinking about what's happening for me in this moment. What are my beliefs? And in particular, the beliefs is that foundational. When we feel that moment of trigger or that visceral body response to something we've experienced, it's often tied to the fact that we are holding beliefs and values that may or may not have been surfaced. And whatever you're experiencing is on the opposite end of that spectrum that you value.
Fiona?
Yes.
Eva has asked, she said, I'd love to hear other people's case studies, especially for the one from Marcian's question about using this as an exit process. I would like to echo that from Eva. I have a little bit of a light bulb go off thinking of this as an exit process. So I'd love to hear more how you could apply that, or hear from maybe Marcian or someone else around how they think they could apply it as an exit process.
Love that. And we can go back to those slides at some point in time. I do value your time, and having actual conversation would be marvelous. Marcian, would you have the ability to ask a few more questions about that, or pose or frame it up for us?
Let me try. I asked the question because I am an organization practitioner, development practitioner. I used to work with civil social organization, local civil social organization, and sometimes we need to engage them into process, into program that we have designed, but we pre-designed the process looking for outcomes, and we need them to be part of the process, and we need them to develop their own ownership, their own leadership, and I just take the one we are closing now about a community-centered approach based on assets. We had to lead those organizations in effect for them to go and work with communities, to help communities to have ownership on their own development, to sit in the driver seats. But at least when I look back, it seems to me that we are the one doing all the job, and we do not have all perspectives to keep them with something that is really sustainable for them. So I'm just asking myself, if I can have the chance, if I can challenge myself before before getting them in the program, have this kind of reflection that could help me to know more about, not in terms just of statistic or structural organization, but in terms of how kind of leadership they have. What are the power dynamics that are running inside the organization? Who has the ability to talk? Who does not have the ability to talk? And how and I will go. While Dana was talking, asking when could I be the channel communication, and at what time should I be the conduct communication? And it is more important in the exit process in terms of, okay, we have done with them. We give them some skills, we help them develop some skills and abilities. And now we need to exit the process. Sometimes we just ask them, what are their perspectives? What are we ask them their feedback, but we did not give them those kind of insight that give them, we do not transfer a kind of leadership we were dealing with them when we accompany them, so that they can take from there to go further. That's what I was asking, how this tool can help for us to be aware of our position, because as outsider, sometimes we do not know how to get in, how far we can get in, and how far we can stay, we can take a step aside. And it is really, for me, it really matters. So that's why I asked the question. I see the power of the tool, and I would like to adapt it in that perspective on those challenges of involving people, engaging people. Even we have another experience. We have a training parcours online, and we process it, and we ask people to apply, and we have good I can say good candidates we selected, and we try to have an engaging process, trying to know if they will be able to go at the end of the parcours, if such kind of things that give us by the beginning the how can I say it, the assurance that we will move with them step by step. But I see that we do not really go enter those persons, even if it is a one-to-one relation. How could you use these tools from individual to relationship, and from relationship to our organization? That could be the training, the online training, and from the systemic goals. So those are some questions that was coming out, the reflection. I was just struggling in my that is okay.
Marcian, thank you. That was fabulous. I have nothing to add other than yay, yes. And it's a framework. That's the beauty of it. You get to make up the questions you want to ask, and that's a way, it's a skeleton that you get to add the flesh to, right? It has the capability of doing those things. Thank you. And Eva, thank you for asking that question. That was just marvelous, and the multiple ways that it could be applied. Any other things that come up for people around, yes, thank you, Marcian, that come up for ways that you could apply this, or questions about how to apply it?
I made a quick comment in the chat that even just hearing Marcian chatting about, it sounds like this could also be a framework that would be great for evaluation. So it's a leadership tool, it's a leadership lens that the questions can also support the evaluation process, whether that is the evaluation of the leadership within a particular organization or a project or a program, or with the participants of that project or program. Some of the questions that could be framed, like Marcian was saying, that could be framed back to those participants, so that they can have some autonomy in thinking about their leadership experiences within the work.
That's amazing. It really is a touch point. It can be used in evaluation Yeah, that was fabulous. It can be used in the evaluation. It can give us that touch point that we need to understand what's happening in the circumstances. I guess my big proponent is how do we move from Band-Aid solutions to root cause? And how do we make and commit ourselves to a bit of a longer term process that won't be as fast and may create the transformation that we are also looking for? And so evaluation is a great place to think about that. It could be used in the way that we think about it can be used in the way that we even do the development of the people that we work with and how we support them, right? And how we can hear and create those environments where we can have feedback loops and accountability conversations, and being able to dive into the intent versus impact and looking at it from an objective perspective around the issue, not the person. And that's my other hope, is that it could be used to decenter personal issues and bring it out into looking at it from more of a system. What are the system pieces at play? What part do I own? What part do you own? There was no right or wrong in the example that I gave you, right? The director wasn't necessarily wrong. I wasn't necessarily wrong. I could have done better. I could have done a better job in certain areas. She could have done better jobs in certain areas. That's the piece that I think about, is how can we hold that and hold that accountability? So this session is going to be ending in about 8 minutes, just to give us a bit of time to switch over to Dana's presentation. In this time, I'm just curious whether, Eva, you'd be willing to do a brief checkout on the harvesting of the things that came up for you out of listening. And then just when we're just at the very end, if everybody's willing to turn on their screens for a brief moment so we can get a picture of the group, that would be marvelous. But I'll pass it over to Eva, if I may, now.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. I don't really know what we're going to get out of this, but you haven't already got out from your presentation, but let's go. I've been drawing little pictures that you might be able to see. So we started off essentially talking about, this is Fiona with all of the little students, and they went off to speak to the director, who was like, and she was in an up power position. And from there, what Fiona did essentially was got us to go into this, the bird's eye view. So that's supposed to be a bird. And the bird is flying over the university, that's the university. And for me, I think that story was central to understanding her lens. And as she reminded us, there were 3 parts to her lens, and there was being curious, and there was celebrating, and being creative. And we were focusing on the curiosity. That's also supposed to be a microscope. So for me, I think one of the huge takeaways from the session was how to be curious about the multiple levels and layers, how to be curious. First, I think what Fiona said about the nervous system being on fire. So first, when you are in a situation of conflict, to be able to tend to yourself, and then to be able to then zoom out a little bit more, and to be able to say, well, okay, if this is what's happening for me, is this something that I can address? So what kind of problem is this? Is it a simple problem? Is it a complex problem? Is it something that I can actually work through? And then also for me, I feel what was interesting was understanding the intersections of your identity, because so often in my life, I've just kind of assumed my identity is not going to influence how I'm going to be heard. And that has negative implications to how well you can be heard. So understanding your own dynamics, your own politics, before you even walk into a conflict or a conversation, to me was a huge takeaway. And then after that, going into the interpersonal, who in the system, who in the organization can help mediate this or might be able to lobby on my behalf. And also maybe this is something that we look at long-term. So I did a bit about the drizzle and the downpour. So do we want to be the drizzle or the downpour? And that, for me, the learning was that it's contextual to your life situation and the privileges that you hold. and that if being in an organization is dependent, like if your residential visa, your status, your livelihood is dependent on this job or this relationship, neither is an option. Neither the downpour, neither the drizzle is an option. But if it isn't, maybe being the drizzle for a much longer process of a 5-year, 10-year process would be a way forward. And looking further, so I leave you with one last graphic, which is, do we want to be the Band-Aid solution, or do we want to get to the root cause? And getting to the root cause is just such a complex issue. Going through Fiona's model, so we start with the personal, and then we go into interpersonal. We look at community, and then we look into the larger picture. So what Fiona was talking about in terms of understanding the positions of power within an organization, and then also the cultural influence of what has created the organizations or the systems in which we're living in, and working through, and understanding that there might be a massive there might be a massive difference between those two. Might help us ground ourselves in the action that we need to take hold. And Marcienne's description about like explaining how to use these questions to think more about engagement process, or just how to like bring more critical thinking into where something might be falling short. That for me was a core learning. It's like, what we're doing in curiosity is we're just opening, and we'll keep opening the doors, we keep expanding, keep asking ourselves, like, where are the different, what am I not getting here? And so what I really take away from the session is just the lens is multifaceted, and it's showing us from the very, very individual, like, do I need to go and take a hot shower, and do I need to drink a coffee right now? Too much larger is this white supremacy delusion here at play. That would be my core learning.
Oh, Eva, I couldn't thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. If you're willing just to do a really quick hop on to so that we can see a quick goodbye, if you're willing to, I would love to get a just quick picture of the people who participated. And I am so grateful. Yeah, Eva, like, thank you for being here and summarizing for us. So we'll do a quick second, sorry. All right, we're gonna take a quick screenshot now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so very much for taking this time with me today and participating in a meaningful way. I will leave you with my last, if you need to connect with me, you can reach me at Fiona@insidechange.com. If you have any further questions, if you find yourself using or reflecting back on this tool and you have some more ahas, please do connect with me. I would be absolutely thrilled to hear from you. So thank you all so much for your time. I know it's valuable. Thank you. I will stop the recording now.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.